The goal for each podcast episode is for us to be honest, open, and transparent. While conversations do include mental health, this show does not replace support from a licensed mental health professional. If you feel triggered by any of these conversations, please feel free to take a break from the episode and check in with your support system.
I was fighting something I couldn't do on my own, and it was hard. I went to the doctor, and mental health is not one size fits all. A medication that works for me won't work for someone else. If therapy is right for me, that might not work for someone else either. And it was a lot of trial and error, and it got a lot worse before it got better. But I remember being told that after I filled out the little charts, when they ask you, like, how are you feeling? And you have to rate it on a scale of 1 to 10, that it was pretty clear that I was struggling with clinical depression and generalized anxiety disorder myself. And that was kind of the point that I realized that this is hard, and this is something someone shouldn't have to do alone.
What's going on, everyone? Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode. This is episode 43 of the Unlearn the Lies About Mental Health, the podcast. I am your host, Abraham Scully, and you are tuned in to the podcast for young adults and leaders in education, wanting to learn how to create safe spaces for honest dialogue about mental health. And today, it's like no other. We're going to have an amazing conversation. I have an amazing guest that I'm excited to bring to you all. And today's story, I believe, will be super impactful for those who want to learn more about mental health. Maybe you have battled with your own mental health challenges. Maybe you are inspired to advocate for mental health and engage in different projects so that we're having more conversations about mental health. So I brought on today's guest so that you can hear a little bit about her story, her experience, and how she's got into the work that she is currently doing. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Jasmin Kotek. How are you?
Good. How are you?
I am doing well. Thank you for joining the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, of course. If you can, please just share a little bit about what you have been doing, what you're up to these days. Share with the audience a little bit about yourself. I had a chance to check out your bio, and you are involved in many things. So it's really fun. So if you can, just dive into that a little bit.
Absolutely. As you said, I'm Jasmin Kotek. I currently am a middle school math teacher at Faribault Middle School. I teach 7th and 8th grade, pre-algebra and algebra 1. I also coach a ton of things. I coach high school dance team, fall dance team, cheer, and now I actually coach softball too. I just added that to my resume as of a couple of weeks ago. I don't know anything about it, but I'm learning. I did learn when you run through first base, you have to turn over your right shoulder, or you actually can, other team can steal the ball. That's something new.
Huh.
Aside from that, I'm a local title holder in the Miss America organization, competing for the job of Miss Minnesota this summer. I'm currently Miss South Central. With that, I've had a community service initiative, and I've always focused on mental health, and specifically mental health for Minnesota students. And with that, I've helped become a partner with the 501c3 nonprofit Culture Change, where we really made mental health framework for schools. It all started, though, with a 4-part initiative that we passed a couple years back, starting at Minnesota State University Mankato, but we expanded it to universities across the Midwest. And that provided telehealth services, year-round counseling services, mental health first aid training, and then also a D2L or an online digital mental wellness course. Aside from that, I work to implement the Excel project in schools, which really breaks down mental health to a vernacular that anyone can understand, whether it's a child that's only 3 years old, all the way up to someone who is even retired, but it makes it so that everyone can understand mental health and what it is. And then I actually published a children's book last spring called Believe Bella that breaks down mental health to a child. It's pretty cool. I was pretty excited when it happened. It was kind of a bucket list thing. I remember my grandma reading, I think it was called 3 Dog Night when I was in kindergarten. I was like, oh, that's so cool. Like, I want my book to be read in a school. Then fast forward almost 20 years later. Actually, 20 years later, it makes me feel kind of old. But I wrote my own children's book. And with that, though, it talks about growth mindset and really just having that positive outlook and how you can achieve anything with that. So again, bringing mental health down to something that anyone can understand. And exciting news that we talked about earlier, but I'm actually publishing my second children's book this next month. I really wanted to bring it out during Mental Health Awareness Month, so May. And it's called Exhale Ella, and it kind of incorporates that Exhale project. And again, that positive mindset, that growth mindset. So I'm really excited for that.
That is awesome. So, like I mentioned, you are involved in so many amazing things, super impactful work. So I'm very grateful for you to come on the show. So I'm assuming you graduated from a university in Minnesota. Is that assumption close to being correct?
Yes, I actually started at Winona State University, super
Okay.
small town, kind of middle of almost nowhere, but I love it. It was super cool. And 2 years in, I decided to transfer to Minnesota State University, Mankato, so just about 2 hours away. And then that's where really a lot of my mental health work started. Yeah, I
Got you.
graduated last spring with a degree in secondary mathematics education.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
Congrats.
thanks.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about your experience at Minnesota State University, Mankato, and what was that like for you, even making that transition over there after the first college you were at?
It was difficult at first. I think any transition and change is hard, but I knew I just wanted more opportunity and different opportunity. So, like any transition, it was hard going from something you know so well to something new. I loved Winona, but I did want that new opportunity and just something different. I really loved Minnesota State University Mankato, though. I went at the absolute wrong time, though, because I think within 3 months of being there is when COVID started to hit. So
Mm,
almost my entire time at Mankato was spent online. With that, though, the people I met there were phenomenal and the opportunities were what I wanted. I really just wanted that different opportunity. And Mankato, I believe it was truly a path that I was supposed to take. At the time, I didn't know it, but now I see it. But I met some awesome people. I was able to help, found a 501c3 nonprofit, their culture change, and really do a lot of my mental health work starting at Mankato. So I really loved it. I love the people. I love the campus. I loved the community. It was really hard to leave. And now I'm back in Faribault. So it's sad to not see Mankato, but I admire it from afar yet. I love Mankato.
sure. That's awesome.
Yeah.
And for those of you listening, you heard her mention culture change a few times, the 501c3. We actually had Seth Nilsson on episode 41. So they work together to found this amazing nonprofit organization. So if you haven't listened to Seth's story and a little bit more about culture change, you can check out episode 41. So you mentioned, Jasmine, that your mental health kind of journey or the significance of mental health started when you went to the University of Minnesota. How did that start for you?
Yeah, mental health. I mean, working to advocate for mental health started there. I struggled with
Mm,
mental health growing up. My first interaction really with mental health and understanding or being introduced to the terms of what mental health was when I was in fourth grade. I actually lost my cousin Brandon to suicide when I was in fourth grade. He had suffered from clinical depression and generalized anxiety disorder. And when I was in fourth grade, these terms were huge. I didn't understand what they were, and I shouldn't have had to understand what they were because I was a fourth grader. That wasn't a vernacular that I knew.
mm,
And then transpiring into when I was growing up, I was in high school and I remember this moment very clearly, but I got home from dance team tryouts and I was physically sick to my stomach because I was so nervous about the outcome of it. And I was a trained dancer. I danced in
mm.
seventh grade. I won the state tournament. I won so many awards at competitions, but I just remember like I couldn't fight the nerves, the social anxiety, and wasn't enjoying what I was doing anymore. And I remember, no joke, sitting on my bathroom floor, sick to my stomach, crying to my mom that I can't do this. And that was kind of the turning point when I realized that I was fighting something I couldn't do on my own. And it was hard. I went to the doctor, and mental health is not one size fits all. A medication that works for me won't work for someone else. If therapy is right for me, that might not work for someone else either. And it was a lot of trial and error, and it got a lot worse before it got better. But I remember being told that after I filled out the little charts, when they ask you like, how are you feeling? And you have to rate it on a scale of 1 to 10, that it was pretty clear that I was struggling with clinical depression and generalized anxiety disorder myself. And that was kind of the point that I realized that this is hard and this is something someone shouldn't have to do alone. So a couple of years later, when I started pageants and had a community service initiative to advocate for, I knew it was clear because of my cousin's struggles, my own, that mental health needs to be changed and that we gotta be the people that do that, right?
For
Because
sure.
you can't change what you can't see, and you can't see mental health. It's not like a broken arm that you can get an x-ray and they're like, oh yep, we can fix that. Or it's not like a cut where you see blood and you can put a Band-Aid on it. It's something internal.
Yeah.
So having those opportunities, and at Mankato and even in Winona, I had a lot of support there in starting the journey that really transpired into Mankato. Just seeing those different outlets that we could not change mental health, but we can make it easier for those struggling and give those resources, give those education, give those tools to people so that they don't feel alone, because that's how I felt. And that's kind of my goal, is to be the person for others that I once needed myself. That's been my tagline since I've started, but I really aspire to show anyone else that if I can do it, you can do it too.
That is awesome. Thanks for using those experiences for something good. Because I know, one thing when it comes to mental health is a lot of times when we have different challenges. And for those listening, you've heard me share my own mental health journey and the challenges I've had with major depressive disorder and all of that. Most of the time, the desire is to get over this and then forget about it. Like, how can I no longer be depressed? How can I no longer struggle with anxiety? And then as soon as I feel any ounce of relief, let's forget about that and act like it never happened. But
Absolutely.
there are like a select few who say, no, this happened so that I can use it to help others, so that I can use it to, impact another life, because there were things that could have helped me to prevent this. And if I can reach those people who could be the younger version of Jasmine, I would much rather do that than to act as if it never happened. So kudos to you for really taking that experience and changing, so many lives. I know you mentioned before we started recording how the bracelets that you create have reached over 4,000, I think you said, individuals in different states. And that's rooted in your own experience. It's like, I experienced this and I'm going to do as much as I can to make sure something good comes from this. So that's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Right. Even those struggles into strengths, right?
for sure. For sure. Your cousin, say his name again.
His name is Brandon,
His name was Brandon.
and he
So
passed
in
away in 2008.
2008, and you were in fourth grade.
Yes.
So yeah, go ahead.
Oh, yeah. No, I just remember it was kind of a really big thing to understand. And when you're in fourth grade, those things don't make sense, right? I remember though, I woke up one late night, super late, and the kitchen lights were on. And I got out of bed and I walked out. And my parents were sitting there talking, and they told me very bluntly that your cousin Brandon committed suicide. And that word suicide, I was like, he's gone. You
Hmm.
don't process death the same or understand what that really means. And it was a couple months later, I was actually watching, I was at the swim team banquet with my grandmother, and they played the end of the year recap video. And I saw a picture of him, and that's when I just broke down into tears, because I realized that picture of that person there, he was no longer on this earth, and that could have been prevented. But the lack of resources, the lack of support is the reason he wasn't here. And it's just crazy to think that there's so many people going through these invisible battles.
Yeah. How old was he when he
He was
passed?
17, just about to turn 18.
Wow. Wow.
So he had his whole life ahead of him, and he probably could have done so much, but we'll never know.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit, as much as you remember, like after hearing that news, like what, if anything, changed about Jasmine, little Jasmine?
I think I just remember it very, very clearly, like my parents and my grandmother, because my grandmother is a very, very big role model in my life. She really, truly had a hand in raising me. But I remember just all of them sitting down and saying, never do something like this. If you ever need that help, we are here. And it was just a lot to understand. And I remember being so confused, because those words, bringing it back to depression, anxiety, suicide, they're big. They're not in a fourth grader's vocabulary, and they shouldn't have to be. So I just remember really sitting there and being like, wow, this is a lot. And like I said, it didn't process till much, much later. And then again, reflecting on it so many time after time after time, becoming older, that was really a turning point.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. And it kind of reminds me of my experience. So one thing is I do think we can have the conversation about mental health and mental illness at a very young age, because that is what helps us to really understand what the human experience is. Because when I think about things like mental health, I think about things like depression, anxiety, any mood disorder. It's a part of the human experience. And the more we're able to recognize these are things that fall under the category of anxiety, these are the things that fall under the category of depression, and we're better equipped to deal with them in healthy ways. So I just imagine, wow, what if 14-year-old Abraham or 10-year-old Abraham was able to recognize that those feelings he felt in his body was anxiety? Like maybe I would have the language for what I was dealing with, and so many other children. So I think that it's a way to be strategic with how we help young people to have these conversations and have the language, which is why I love so much what you all are doing at Culture Change. It's like you're bringing these conversations, you're making it practical, you're making it easy to understand. I remember Seth mentioned different ways that he's incorporating, moods and feelings and helping, children process emotions, which I think is huge. When I was 14, my parents divorced, and that was a very difficult experience for me. And I remember transitioning from being this very motivated student. I was very respectful. I was very excited about life. And then in like a minute, life changed for me. So I had, my family in one house, and then the next day I'm going between staying with my mom and then staying with my dad, and not knowing what's going on with my family. Why is my family, broken up, and how do I even deal with these emotions? And I don't know if you resonate with this, Jasmine, but as a man, it's so hard to express any emotion outside of being happy or angry, right? I didn't even know that the emotion or feeling of betrayal was a thing. I didn't know what it looked like to process the feeling of being sad or hurt or having that emotional pain. And so as a 14-year-old, I'm having all of these different feelings and physical sensations and thoughts that I couldn't identify with, and also didn't have the language for, because I grew up, both my parents were from Jamaica, and they raised me and my three other siblings to be, hardworking, strong-minded, individuals, independent individuals. And so in growing up in that environment, we didn't have conversations about mental health. And so now my family is broken up, and obviously for any little kid, it's like, what the heck is happening? And then you're feeling all these things, and you don't have a safe place to process or express them. And so what happens is you suppress them. And I think the more you suppress these emotions, the more it takes you down to this downward spiral. And then it leads to things like mood disorders. I heard one psychiatrist put it this way, and it really helped me to understand it in a practical way. He said, he asked the question, how many of us have moods? And obviously everyone is like, yeah, I have moods, right?
Right.
And so he says, well, if you have moods, then there's a likelihood that you can develop a mood disorder, because a mood disorder essentially is the inability to effectively manage your moods. And as I got older and I learned that, wait, depression is a real thing. It doesn't mean that you're weak. It doesn't mean that you don't have the mental and emotional strength. It's actually a mood disorder that affects the way you think, the way you feel, the way you behave. It started to shift my way of understanding things like depression and anxiety. So I think, the more we can bring these terms and help, younger kids to understand it in a way where they now can identify with some of the things that they're experiencing, because and I think Seth mentioned it in the episode, is that a lot of these conditions happen before you're 14 years old, right? So how
Yes.
can we equip them before they even turn 14, you know?
Right? 50% of it's 50, yeah, 50% of mental health disorders are prevalent before a child turns the age of 14. And like you said, my parents also got divorced, actually. I was
Mm.
16 though, so a couple years later. But yeah, it's like there's so many feelings and so many things going on, and it's hard to explain. It's hard to really ground yourself in and know all those emotions. And bringing it back also to what you said, we need to equip our youth with understanding their emotions, their feelings, their moods, and really, yeah, break it down in a practical way they can understand it, so that they know when they do start experiencing these different things, what they are up against and what it is. I love how you noted that, though, the
Yeah.
practical way of doing it,
Yeah.
because you have to be able to distinguish it in a way that they can understand. So that's awesome. I love that.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for sharing. So we mentioned that you're a mental health advocate, and it's obvious because you're in this space and you're doing a lot of cool work. What does it mean to be a mental health advocate to you when you think of that?
It means so many things. My big one is that being that person for others that I once needed myself, but it's being an educator, giving them the resources, the tools, and anything that can help someone else's journey become a little bit easier, or just know that they're not alone. Because I think that's so important when you're going through all of this, is being able to understand it, know what's going on, have those resources available, have those equitable resources available, the same to all, regardless of anything out there. And then just also having someone alongside of you, because kind of like you talked about too, it's kind of scary, it's hard, and I was also raised to be very strong and independent, so just knowing that it's okay to reach out for help, that you don't have to fight it alone.
100%. You mentioned a little bit about your experience at Minnesota State University. Tell me a little bit more on what were what were the resources like on campus? Like, what did mental health support look like for students?
That's kind of how culture change started, and it was kind of funny, but I actually was running to be a sweetheart for a fraternity, and Seth was in this fraternity, and I talked about my previous work with mental health at Winona State, and he had reached out to me over Instagram, and the rest was kind of history, but we both saw the lack of mental health resources. And it was during the time of COVID that year-round counseling services were not a thing. They weren't there for students. And during COVID, that's when it was needed the most.
Mm-hmm.
And those telehealth services also weren't available. And we're in COVID. We could not meet face to face. So our goal was really, how can we provide those resources on campus for everybody? Because we saw the lack of them. So that's how culture change started. It was a hot summer day in a garage, but we all sat in the middle of COVID and we put out this framework. And at the time, it was a 4-part mental health initiative that did provide the things we saw the university lacked. So the first was those telehealth services, being able to reach anyone, anywhere, at any time, year-round counseling services, because we saw that when you were not a student in the summer months, you could not access counseling services. So during the calendar year, your August through roughly May, you could go into the counseling center, receive services, but they were also limited. You only had X amount of services you could receive per semester, trimester, whatever the school is on that basis. And we wanted it so you could have unlimited, but also in those summer months when times of more lowness were relevant, because you weren't around people, you weren't socializing as much, your schedule was changing, you also had access to those services. And then mental health first aid training to specific majors and also faculty, because we saw the benefits of it and what it could bring to you and just the knowledge of mental health that came with it. And then lastly, it was a D2L. So we use D2L at Mankato as our online coursework, but it's just an online course that really provided mental health resources to the student body, but then also provided the university statistics on how the student body felt the mental health resources and support was prevalent on campus. So it was really
So,
cool. It went from a hot
yeah.
summer day in a garage to presenting this to student government and it being put into action.
So was it all of those initiatives that were put into action? And how in the world did y'all get that to happen? How'd you get buy-in?
Yes, it was crazy how hard yet how easy it was. It was hard to just develop the ideas and what we wanted to put out there, but putting it into action, people were much more open to hearing what we had to say than I expected, at least. So we put this into a framework. We wrote it out, the 4 things we really felt we needed to see. So those 4 main points. And then again, being COVID, we went on a Zoom meeting to the student government and we presented this to them. And we said, we felt this could benefit the campus. This is what we see needs to happen. And they were very open. And within a couple of months, things started to get put into action. And then we were able to present this actually to other universities as well. And again, they could adapt it to their student body. So these were the 4 things we felt we needed, specifically at Minnesota State University, Mankato. But those 4 things could also be taken and adjusted to really whatever the campus felt their climate was. So they could adjust, add more, take away things, and also what was equitable for them, what they had the resources and money to do.
So you went through student government, and student government is who brought it to administration on campus?
I believe so. Kind of from there, it was out of our hands and they took the rest of it. And then once it was passed, that initiative was passed within the student government, then that's yes, when administration took the rest of it on and worked to help achieve those 4 goals.
So what would you say are the main things that student government needed from you all to really be able to communicate the needs that were on campus and how this would benefit the institution? Because one thing that I hear a lot about, and many students even run into, and even, staff on college campuses, is that it's hard to get buy-in from administration because they're not able to recognize the benefits of investing in student mental health. It doesn't bring that return over the investment in other areas that they can make for their institution at large. So like, what were some of the things that SGA said, hey, we need this, and this, so that we can have, enough evidence or support in our conversation with administration?
I think it was at just the perfect timing, truly. We were in the middle of COVID and we saw these students struggling. We saw, the heightened increase of mental health diagnosis, the need of those counseling services. So I believe the buy-in was there. The student government saw that this was needed. All of the student body saw that this was needed. And we were the ones advocating for it. So I feel when they brought it, it was the perfect timing because they saw that this was needed, and just the time frame of everything happening. It was the middle of COVID. So
yeah,
it was definitely at a need. So I feel like we were just very fortunate, right place, right people, right time.
Yeah. So tell me about if there are any experiences or even stories from you or some of your peers during that time before services got implemented. What did it look like to have conversations on campus about mental health, different either student-led mental health initiatives or campaigns? Were there any of those going on prior to you all bringing this to SGA?
There was one mental health club on campus that Seth actually founded. It was Mental Health Mankato. And that was pretty much the only mental health outreach or advocacy at the time on campus. And for me, it was really more a derivative of the experiences I saw off campus, but I knew were translating onto campus. I was still pretty new at the time. And since it was COVID, I wasn't able to meet people in the classroom, but I knew the need was there because I felt the struggle myself. But it was specifically with my dance team girls that I coached that I realized mental health was at an all-time high of needing to be addressed. I do these highliner check-ins. So what I do is I used to send out, and I still do during the dance season, just a weekly mental health check-in to my athletes. And it asks basic questions of, how are you feeling? Do you need to meet with a coach? What's a positive of the week? What's a negative? How are you getting enough sleep? Are you eating healthy? Are you feeling stressed? And I was getting this feedback and I was like, wow, these girls, there's a lot more going on that I don't see that's there because, mental health is invisible. You can't physically see it. And I saw the struggles of my athletes. So knowing that these young teenage girls were struggling, I knew that these students on campus were also struggling. Even if I wasn't there physically having the conversation, I knew it was happening.
Powerful. So that kind of led into the next question I was thinking about, because educators are listening to this, even peers are listening to this, and they're wondering, well, how can I support, the students that I serve? And one practical tool that you gave is a mental health check-in, right? That's something that anyone can, implement. And it's something that gives you responses or data right away. So, and you mentioned questions like, how are you feeling? Share with me, what were the other questions you said?
There was a ton of them. But yeah, I love the instant aspect of the feedback. But I was like, how are you feeling? How are you doing? Do you need to meet with a coach? Just having that connection, reach out, talk about what's going on. Are you getting enough sleep? Are you eating healthy? What's a positive of the week? What was a negative? There is a ton more, but it really just focused on getting that climate check-in of how are my athletes doing and how are they feeling? Because you only see them for a small fraction of the day. And it's in a vernacular that they enjoy. So you're not seeing those, you're seeing those highs, but you're not seeing those lows.
Yeah. And what are some ways, because you've done this, you've experienced this, and so you've gotten to hear some of the things that your athletes were experiencing that they wouldn't necessarily just come to you and share. What do you do with this information? You know, you're now recognizing this dancer who I see, you know, has a smile and looks like she's doing well is actually struggling with this or that. How can you intervene? How can you support? What are some things that can be implemented after, you know, hearing this?
It was hard. I remember I didn't think I would get the responses that I did, and I didn't realize how open my athletes would be. But the first time I opened that Google Doc and looked at the responses, I broke down in tears. I remember I read a response to an extent of that athlete going on how she was struggling with an eating disorder. And I will never forget just the tears running down my face because I didn't realize like what these girls are struggling with that I didn't know. My favorite thing though out of this is because of this form, I started the uncomfy conversation. So once a year, we all get together, and I used to call it a come to Jesus, but now I call it a come to Jasmine meeting. And I really have the girls open up to each other. So we sit down in a circle and I make them talk, but it starts with easy questions. Like, how are you doing today? What's your favorite color? And then it gets into really uncomfortable conversational questions. So it starts with something easy that they can answer in a second. And it progresses all the way to, how are you doing? What are you struggling with? All these really deep, intimate questions that these girls then answer. And at first I was like, oh, I'm not going to get any responses. These girls aren't going to want to do this. But it was crazy the amount of response I did get and how open these athletes were with one another. And it really broke that barrier. And they saw that I have 30 others that are here to support me and are going through very similar situations. And even if they're not, there's someone I can turn to if I need to. And I remember at the end of this conversation, all the athletes were like, we really liked this. Like, I know I have 29 or 30 other best friends in this room with me. And so every year I do that to really open that conversation within my pool of athletes and really get those uncomfortable conversations out of the way so that they all can thrive and strive in their own way.
That's powerful. That's powerful because that's something that anyone can do. There's a statistic that says 67% of students are more likely to open up with a friend than they are with an adult, a mental health professional. And so that statistic alone shows us that if we equipped, you know, young people with the tools to be there for their friends, when that 67% does reach out, they know how they can support. And one of the easiest things that anyone can do is to listen. So I think that's really cool that you're able to say, well, if so many of my athletes are dealing with this, how amazing would it be if they were able to support each other? Because peer support is powerful. It's been around for so many years and it's effective. So thank you for doing that. That's huge.
It was really cool. I didn't think I'd get the response I did because, like you said, it's kind of an uncomfortable situation.
Yeah.
It's hard, but knowing that you have that peer and someone you can turn to, that's priceless.
100%. And I'm sure those relationships between them got deeper, even, you know, outside of being in dance, you know. So that's something that you facilitated. That's a space that you created. So I love to come to Jasmine.
Come to Jasmine, yes.
Yeah.
All my athletes would know that term. It's a household name at this point.
That's awesome. As you were reading through some of the responses from your athletes, which of those responses reminded you the most of little Jasmine, if any?
I think there's a lot that resonated with me, but just those opening up about those internal struggles of I'm really struggling with not being perfect, because something I always struggled with growing up is aiming to be this ideal image of perfection. And it took me until way later in life to realize that you're always going for progress, not perfection. And being a dancer, being an athlete, you're always striving to be an image of perfect, right? So really seeing these girls talk about how they're struggling with not achieving all their goals and all their dreams really resonated with me, because, well, it wasn't failure, it was still progress, but it wasn't perfection, because no one's ever going to be perfect. So that was always really resonate with me.
So talk to me about that, because so I deal with that a lot, and there are some strategies, like even to this day, and I know where it's rooted from. It's rooted from childhood and trying to please, my parents and trying to get that good job, so I always love when someone brings this up. I'd love to hear your process through understanding progress and the importance of progress over perfection. Like, what are some of the things that you've done or still do that help you to internalize the significance and power of seeing it as progress, which is the thing we're striving for, versus perfection? How do you process that?
I still struggle with this today, because I am someone who I want to achieve and be the best at everything I do. And I'm
No,
sure you can
not
relate,
you.
wild, right? But I always remember that I'm my own harshest critic. I know. So one of my biggest things I've been trying to do recently is really sit down and just look at my day and notice what I have achieved. So I'll be like, okay, I accomplished X, Y, and Z, and that is progress. I may not be the best dancer. I may not be the best teacher. I may not be the best advocate or educator yet, but I know that I did X, Y, and Z that made me better. So while I may not be perfect, I became better today by doing these things. And it's hard because I still want to see instant results. I want to see that I am this high overachiever. I did all these amazing things, but I need to remember that it takes time. So it's been hard. I still struggle with it today. And I think it's just something I'm always striving to become better at.
That's really good. Thanks for sharing that. And I think, one thing that I share in presentations, because I do like speaking presentations, workshops nationally. And one thing I like to share with the audience is this affirmation. It's, I am enough. I will always be enough. I have always been enough.
I
And I
love that.
think, I don't think we say that to ourselves enough or really believe in that statement. But when we really think about the core of who we are as human beings, it's like, yes, we are. Like, look at you. You spoke about COVID, and I think about like, dang, in March of 2020, the world looked completely different, and there were so many things where I was thinking, are we ever going to get back to quote unquote normal? Like,
Right.
what is happening? And then you talk about like the political climate, the racial climate. There were so many things that I was like, I had no idea the world would look like this, but it did. And then I look at like how so many people have overcome and have bounced back from the adversities that we've all experienced. And it's because like we're human beings and we are resilient. And there are things that we go through in life where it seems like that's it. But then we realize, no, it's not. And I actually learned something from those difficulties. And that alone is something to celebrate. It's like, man, I made it. I made it this far.
Right?
Like,
Like I
yeah,
did it. Like surviving to this day that's more than enough.
yes, 100%.
I love that piece of advice you mentioned. I actually always take this with me, but Ellie Mark, she was a former Miss Minnesota, and she always said to take this, but I am better than nobody else, and nobody else is better than me. And I always try to remember that, like whatever fraction of that statement I need at the time, like nobody else is better than me, or I am no better than anyone else, because it's really hard to compare yourself to others. And especially with mental health, seeing others' achievements or what's going on around you can really factor into it.
Mm-hmm.
So I always like that little piece of advice and just taking whatever portion of it that I need that day.
Yeah, that's good. Thanks for sharing that. Tell me a little bit about what keeps you well. What do you do for your mental health these days?
Like I said, mental health is not one size fits all. Today, I feel that I have really learned what works for me. One thing I have found that has been an outlet for me is exercise. I know that sounds very simple, but I feel very accomplished whenever I work out. So I've really worked on a good fitness routine and working out every single day to give my body what it needs to succeed. And then aside from that, a good, very good healthy diet. I notice that when I eat a lot of sugars or very high processed foods that I don't feel very good. And then that factors into me negatively. So I really work on that. And then finding time for things that I love. I love coaching. I love teaching. I love advocating for things I'm passionate about. So taking the time to do the things that I care about and that help me feel successful, because I know when I feel successful that it transpires into everything I do and my mood and my overall well-being as a person. So
Yeah, that's good. So I got two more questions. Is that cool?
yeah, heck yeah.
All right. So the podcast is titled Unlearn the Lies About Mental Health. And I am very passionate about eradicating the stigma, the shame around mental health, because I find that although like a lot of people are talking about mental health now, influencers, celebrities, we're hearing more about it, whether it's the news or social media, there's still this stigma associated with it that when we are struggling with our mental health or we know someone who is, there's that hesitation to talk about it. Right. And so that bothers me a lot. And if I'm completely honest, I went through an experience just last year where I realized I still battle with stigma. And there are things about mental health and mental illness where I still need to do that internal work to remove that shame. So I'm able to go deeper in understanding myself, understanding others, and being in a better position, just growing as a person. So with all of that being said, I consider the lies, the stigma, those misconceptions about mental health and mental illness. How can we eradicate mental health stigma, in your opinion?
My biggest takeaway or go-to for this is to share our stories. You talking about your story, me talking about mine, taking those stories and bringing them to life and turning those stories and those struggles into strengths. So really just opening that conversation and normalizing it. I know it sounds very simple, but it takes a lot to talk about what you go through and to really bring that story to life. So I believe by sharing those stories, that's the best way to remove the stigma, showing that people like us that want to be high achievers, or even someone look at Simone Biles, who is this predicted gold medalist Olympian, standing up there and taking a step down because she knew mentally she wasn't there. By people stepping up and saying, hey, I need to take care of my mental health first, I think that is the best way to remove the stigma surrounding it.
That's awesome. Final question.
Yeah.
What is mental health to you?
Mental health to me is really that holistic, healthy lifestyle, but how that translates into your overall emotional well-being. I know it sounds like a lot of big words in one, but just how you are doing at your current time and place and how that looks different on everyone at every different time.
This podcast is powered by Speaks to Inspire, the mental health solution for young adults suffering in silence. Did you know that students who experience shame and hold negative perceptions about mental health conditions are less likely to reach out for help? By marrying the art of storytelling with mental health education, Speaks to Inspire is creating safe spaces through comprehensive, high-impact programs that help colleges, universities, and schools increase engagement and retention. Learn how you can bring a Speaks to Inspire speaker to your campus by visiting www.speakstoinspire.com/speakers.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That's really important because it helps me to remember that mental health is not this or that.
No, it's not linear, right?
Yeah.
It's always changing. It's up, it's down.
Exactly.
It's different of your parameters, the time, the place, what you're doing, what's happening. It's crazy.
Yeah.
Always changing.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I think it just broadens our understanding of it so that we can better support ourselves and even others. And also, thank you for sharing your story. From
Thank
this
you.
conversation, you are helping us to eradicate stigma. And it takes individuals like you who are bold, courageous, and motivated to say, you know what, I went through this and it's not going to end here. I'm going to use this and take this struggle and turn it into strength. I love that you mentioned that and that you came on the show today. So we shared a little bit about culture change and your involvement with culture change, as well as your book, and you have an upcoming book, and you're involved in the Exhale Project, hashtag Exhale Project, and anyone can learn about what you're doing there. Tell me, give me some information about how can others connect with you? How can they learn more about culture change and then the different projects that you're a part of?
Absolutely. I do have a personal website, www.jasminkotek.com. And on there, I have my personal contact information. I also have the Excel project on there, so you can see what it is, what it does, how you can get involved. I have my books on there, so you can see the link on there, as well as my upcoming book will be on there as well soon. And then it has links to culture change as well. So you can go log in, see culture change, what they're all about and what we do. So yeah, that's kind of my best plug-in is my website, because it's a one-stop shop. It has everything right there for you.
That's awesome. And I know we talked about the Excel project already and the bracelets, but please just share a little bit more about the bracelets and how can someone get one? What is it about? What's the purpose of it?
Absolutely. So shortly I'll be putting out a Google Doc again, but what the Excel project is it was a project started by Ms. Topeka Cooper K a couple of years ago, and it talks about breaking down mental health to all ages. So she brought it into elementary schools, and children put a positive word unique to them on a bracelet, and they craft it themselves, any colors, any saying they want. And it's a reminder to inhale the positives and exhale the negatives, and really focus on what they can control and what they can't in relation to mental health. And then with that, it sparks a conversation. When someone sees that bracelet, they'll be like, oh, what's that about? Leads into the conversation of mental health. And then they also pass these along. So when they see someone else that could use the bracelet or that reminder a little more than them, the idea is to pass it on. Again, it's a domino effect. You think about 30 children in a classroom making one bracelet. Even if 15 of those go on a different path, that's 15 conversations of mental health, 15 outlets to normalize that conversation of mental health. And then with that, these bracelets I've brought into classrooms all over the state of Minnesota. We've made over 4,000 of them. And then bringing it back to the Google Doc, I started a Google Doc where people could fill it out anywhere they wanted, type in the words they want. They could choose certain colors or request whatever, or just say random. And then I'd have students or myself, we would make these bracelets and send them out. So that allowed us to reach 13 different states with the goal of all 50. And then they also then have the opportunity to, again, pass those bracelets along, even making that spread even farther with the conversation of mental health. So it's been really amazing. And I know other people in the organization of the Miss America program have taken the project on as well. So it's probably reached way more than 13 states. But my outreach has been 13.
Yeah, that's awesome. Great work.
Yeah. So people can
awesome.
fill out the Google Doc if they want one. That'll be up pretty soon again. I always usually do it in May for Mental Health Awareness Month, or they can make one themselves. It's just bead string and some of the letter beads to make that positive word. So pretty easy. Hobby Lobby is a great place to get the stuff.
Love it. So as she mentioned, her website and all these different projects, we will put the links to all of these projects in the show notes. So feel free to connect with Jasmine there. And I know she's on social media as well, so you can just find her there as well. We'll put those in the show notes. Last but not least, let me share a few resources from Speaks to Inspire. So in the spirit of talking about mental health, we have our 14 ways to support your students' mental health guide. 14 different strategies that you can implement that are practical. You don't need any money. And these are things that as an educator, as a staff member, you can use this guide to have more conversations about mental health and further support your students' mental health and well-being so that they can achieve their goals. So if you look in the show notes, we'll have a link for you to download the free guide. Also, we talked about suicide in this episode, and I always love to mention there are resources, local resources, national resources, and one powerful resource is the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. So anyone at any time can call or text 988 and get support from a crisis counselor. It's confidential. They're open 24/7. If you're not comfortable with talking, you can text 988. If you want to call and talk to someone, you can call 988. And the great thing about it is that you don't necessarily have to be in crisis to make the call. Let's say you are just having a difficult time. It's 3 a.m. You're having these negative thoughts and your best friend is asleep. call 988 and you can get that support. Another thing is we have our blog. So if you go to Speaks to Inspire, that's speaks with the number 2 inspire.com/blog. Check out our latest blog on the importance of mental health education in schools. We also have our Facebook group. So if you're not yet in the community, join a community filled with other mental health advocates, staff, students who are interested in having a conversation about mental health. We are on Facebook. If you search Unlearn the Lies About Mental Health on Facebook, just send me an invite to join the group. I will accept it and you can join our community. So with all of that being said, I hope you enjoyed this conversation, this episode with Jasmine. I enjoyed it. I learned so much about her and the amazing work that she's doing. Make sure you go in the show notes and give her a follow. Check out the work that she's doing and share this episode. If you enjoyed it, share it with someone that you think would benefit from listening to it. And thank you for tuning in. Talk to you next time. Take care.
Thank you.